And I think everybody knows the kind of drill with Zoom by now. Please keep yourselves on mute. You are welcome, though, to chime in at any point with questions, comments, concerns in the chat. And if you're having any technical difficulties, Amy Consalvi is here to help you out with any of those. So with that, welcome everyone to this overview of dPlan ArtsReady. My name is Jessie Keel, and I am a preservation specialist with NEDCC. And as you can see from this slide, we're sort of tailored part of today's presentation towards Massachusetts libraries, but I know we have a lot of other folks joining us today. So please do not feel like this is going to be specific just to Massachusetts. A lot of what we talk about today will be applicable for everyone considering dPlan. So with that, we are going to get started with a quick poll. We just want to get a better sense of who is here today, what your relationship to dPlan is. And so I'm going to launch this. Just pick the answer that best describes you. But if none of those answers seem to make sense to you, you can throw a comment in the chat as well. So give everybody a minute to do that. And I know folks are still joining too. So you're joining and you're seeing this poll, feel free to throw in an answer. And if I end it, you can always just throw in your relationship to dPlan into the chat. Okay. Let's end it there. And I'll just share the results just so you can get a sense of where everybody else is coming from. It looks like you either have heard of dPlan and you want to know more, or this is your first time hearing about it and you're excited to learn about it, which is the perfect audience for what we're going to be doing today. So thank you all for sharing that. So with that, we're going to get started. This is just a quick overview of our plan today. It's a short webinar, and I'm really here to just start by giving you some background and introductory information about dPlan ArtsReady and sort of emergency preparedness in general. And then we'll take a more of a look at the 5 major modules that make up the dPlan tool. And then at the end, I've sort of built this so that there's a lot of time for Q&A at the end, so that questions that you all have, we'll definitely have time to answer them today. So with that, what is dPlan ArtsReady? Again, some of you, I guess, have not heard of it really before. So it's an online emergency preparedness tool for the arts and cultural heritage sectors. It's usable and functional regardless of your organization's size, scope, or discipline, and it offers customized plan elements for your organization. Includes access via your mobile phone. And there's 3 different levels of user access with different kind of read, write, and edit permissions. And we'll get into explaining more of that later. But as some of you may know, both dPlan and ArtsReady were sort of like separate online tools prior to 2022. But there was some funding from a Mellon Foundation grant, and that allowed for this performing arts readiness project, where the 2 disaster planning tools were actually combined and upgraded and made into what we now call dPlan ArtsReady. So I think, yeah, there was at least one person, I think, who was a previous subscriber to the earlier plan. And so, yeah, we've been in this process since 2022 of sort of migrating everyone over and launching this newer version. So subscriptions to dPlan. So dPlan does charge an annual subscription fee. It is $59.40. And all that really does is cover the costs of the technical support and sort of software upgrades it takes to run the tool. But one of the things that kind of prompted us to hold this webinar today is that in the state of Massachusetts, there are actually free subscriptions available to Massachusetts public libraries. And I actually think this has maybe been expanded to also some cultural heritage organizations in the state. And so it's not, obviously the cost of dPlan is not onerous. I think $60 a year comes out to be like $5 a month. But MBLC's program is really designed to try to minimize any barriers Massachusetts libraries might have in terms of developing emergency policies and continue to make sure they can build momentum and awareness among their staff. So if you are a Massachusetts library here today, and you have not taken advantage of this opportunity, I think they launched and announced it at some point last year. I'm going to share the link in the chat where you can go to find out more about this and find the form that you would need to fill out. Let me put that in the chat. The original deadline for this was you needed to register to get your free year by April 30th. We have extended the deadline to June 30th. Just to give everybody a chance to get in there and take advantage of this opportunity. And as I said earlier, I know that we also have a lot of folks joining us today from outside of Massachusetts. But again, I think anybody curious about dPlan, this is really designed to be a pretty general overview to help with that and give you a sense of the tool. Okay. So before we look at dPlan a little bit more closely and go through those modules that I mentioned, I want to take a brief moment to chat about emergency preparedness in general, right? Emergency preparedness is this essential component of maintaining your organization's kind of business operations while also preserving your institution's assets and collections, as well as protecting human health and safety. So by taking preparedness actions like creating a disaster plan, libraries can reduce the risk of disaster and minimize their losses. So I think we're all aware of the kind of increasing levels of emergencies that we're facing, but I think this graphic here does a really good job of putting it into context. So this is from 2023 from the National Center for Environmental Information. And as of December 8th of last year, there were 25 confirmed weather/climate disaster events that had losses that exceeded $1 billion in the United States, right? These are drought events, flooding events, storm events, you name it. Obviously, we're coming to you from today and focused here a little bit on the New England area. In which you can see, right, we had that severe flooding that happened last summer. There was a cold, nor'easter last February. So those are the type of events, but you can see obviously they vary depending on the region. The firestorm in Hawaii last year. I mean, these are events that are making national news. And unfortunately, they're just becoming more and more frequent. But it's right, it's not only these big disasters that are risks to our organizations. It's not just the stuff that appears in the news, the weather system you see coming. It's also accidents that happen at your library. So the picture on the other side of the screen is from a broken sprinkler at a library in Rockport, Maine. So there are other kind of man-made disasters that can happen in your institutions as well. What I want to point out, though, is the unifying theme among these situations is the fact that these disasters are often sudden. We don't expect them. I mean, maybe with the exception of you can see a hurricane coming, it's very unclear for any given disaster, emergency, sudden issue, what the effects are going to be. And I know we're all busy with our normal day-to-day work, so we're not necessarily trying to spend a lot of energy worrying about all of the things that might happen. But it could be something from a small mold outbreak to a massive roof leak. And if you will be able to have a better response and respond more quickly and efficiently if you have taken some key preparation steps. So again, we want to be prepped as much as possible up and down this kind of scale of how likely things are to happen and how severe that they will be when they happen. So that brings us into the emergency management cycle. So emergency planning is just not something that, unfortunately, you can do once, cross off your list and forget about it. It is actually a continuous cycle of mitigation and prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. So that's the kind of graphic that you're seeing here on the screen. So it's kind of an ongoing, once you've ended one phase, you're kind of put back into the other. So let's take a closer look at the cycle, right? We're starting here with mitigation and prevention. This is really where you're going to look for the potential problems due to various specific circumstances for your organization. So this could be regional issues, local issues, what neighboring, what are things next door to you? obviously you can't prevent this damage or mitigate it if you don't understand what those risks are. And FEMA actually defines mitigation sort of officially as any activities that prevent an emergency, reduce the chance of an emergency happening, or reduce the damaging effects of unavoidable emergencies. And so this is the step where we're looking at something like a risk assessment. And so while like a risk assessment does involve a lot of planning, this is not the entire process, right? That is not, you can't just do a risk assessment and say, okay, planning, we understand the risks now, we're ready. No, there's also writing a disaster plan. And so that's where we kind of get into preparedness on the cycle. This is where you're pulling together the resources. And the risk assessment is going to kind of give you the information that will feed into this next step, and it guides your preparedness based on the risks that you've discovered in your risk assessment. And then after that, right, we have the next two, response and recovery. You would ideally have plans that for response and recovery that are kind of discussed in your disaster plan. And FEMA defines recovery as any actions taken to return to a normal or even safer situation following an emergency. So the questions we have up here on the screen is, okay, that's we got the cycle, we have all of these steps, and I know that can be sort of an overwhelming idea that we have all of these things that we're supposed to be doing for emergency preparedness, and how do we start in the cycle? But let's take a step back and think about what we can be doing to support these steps, and I've mentioned some of those already, and then more importantly, who is supporting these steps. So in terms of the what, right, I've already mentioned the risk assessment, that's really key, and I've mentioned the disaster plan. And kind of going into practice with that, any other documentation, this is outside of your disaster plan, but if you had really good documentation about a flood that you had last year, and you already know you have a binder that has the vendors that you used after that issue, has information that you already have, perhaps your insurance policy printed, like that kind of documentation is going to be something that you can pull from and use to support your emergency planning. And then you also want to be doing other actions, right? Like having meetings with your whole staff, with the people who are on the response kind of plan for the organization, doing practice, walking through scenarios just to keep you prepared. And again, regular check-ins. Again, this is a cycle. This is something that you have to constantly prepare for. We usually see organizations who are like, yeah, we have a disaster plan, but we have staff who've worked here for 10 years. They saw it when they onboarded and they've never looked at it once since. How useful is that disaster plan at that point? If the staff who've been there for a really long time aren't up to date on it. So regular check-ins are really so important for this cycle. And then, as I mentioned, right, who is supporting these steps? Now, probably in a lot of cases, it's most of you who are attending today. So thanks for being here. But it's your administration, the staff, but also your volunteers. You have to also be thinking about your visitors and patrons in these steps and what's going to be happening with them. It's your first responders, and even more broadly, it's your regional networks. Who are around you in your state. A lot of times states will have sort of organizations that are there to help bring communities together and support recovery after emergencies, or prevent them and be proactive, like Massachusetts Libraries is doing by kind of supporting this initiative. And I will mention in terms of public libraries, I know a lot of them are linked to city, town, county government. And so do keep in mind that you may need to coordinate, like you may be required to coordinate with the emergency management directors in your town, in your region. That can be a really important resource, and they can also have like certain standards and laws of compliance in terms of emergency preparedness. So a good first step is always to talk to your kind of local governing officials. So what's nice about dPlan ArtsReady is that it can help you with all of these steps in the cycle. So the tool has 5 modules. They are risk assessment, action items, critical stuff, guides and resources, and then reports. And we're actually going to look at each module briefly as we go. Before we do that, though, I want to take a quick moment here to talk about those levels of user access that I sort of mentioned right at the beginning. I think it's important to keep them in mind. First of all, that we're mostly, as we talk today about the modules, we are talking mostly from the administrator point of view. the person who has kind of the highest level of user privileges on here. But it'll just change how you think about who has permissions to see what on dPlan. So as you can see here on the screen, there's these three levels: the admin, manager, and contributor. The admin, as you may expect, can see and edit all of them. And you can have multiple administrators kind of listed. So you don't just have to have one person designated that. The manager can view the modules, but has very specific editing privileges. And I'll sort of try to note as we go through the modules what the manager can and can't do. And then you sort of have the most basic level. This is a contributor. They're only going on there to view like action items that are assigned to them. They have very limited access. So keep that in the back of your mind. And if you have questions about the user types as we go, please don't hesitate to let me know. So we are going to start here with the risk assessment. So after you've created your dPlan ArtsReady account, the risk assessment module is really where you start. And of course, this is falling into our mitigation and prevention part of the emergency management cycle. The risk assessment has 90 questions divided up across 9 critical areas of preparedness. And when you first log in, you're actually going to see a little risk assessment box on the dashboard, and you'll see where you are in the risk assessment every time you log in. So this is sort of what the module looks like. Again, here on the side, let's see if I have my pointer up still. There we go. Okay. Here on the side, you're seeing the 9 critical areas. Actually, that's kind of a lie. You're seeing 7 of the critical areas of 9. You can't see below there'd be programs and then training if you scroll down. And these 9 areas are used throughout dPlan to really organize your action items, your critical stuff, your guides and resources. And so you'll see this kind of breakdown again and again across dPlan. Again, the people that have admin permissions on your organization's account are the only people that are actually able to go in and answer the questions on the risk assessment. And so for each question on the assessment, again, there's 90, kind of broken up between the categories. You're going to, for each sort of statement, so you have a crisis kit, a disaster response kit, your supplies basically. You're going to decide like how important that is, like what's the risk, like how likely are you to need it, which I would say for most organizations, it's going to be pretty serious that you have a kit. And then are you ready? Like, do you actually have that thing? And so if you would mark both of those, and then you have the ability to write a little note in there as well. For yourself to remember, like, oh, actually we do have kits, but they're, as I said here, they're neglected or they're not updated or people take stuff out of them. And if you don't know an answer, if you don't want to answer the question, you can just skip it. There's no reason that you have to answer it now. You can come back to it later. If it doesn't apply to the organization, there is an option, a drop-down option to say like does not apply. The only tip I would say is that, again, there's a lot of questions. I don't suggest you like sit down and try to do all 90 questions at once. It would take you a little while. Every like couple questions, hit the big button here in the corner, save your answers, because the website will time out, and if it's not been like saved, you will lose your progress. I have done it. So my recommendation is just every like couple clicks, click save answers so that you don't lose your progress. And you can skip around in it. Just take your time, make the progress. You can break up, every couple days to do a section, and it becomes really manageable as a process. So once you've marked a question, as you could see on the last one, I had marked it not ready and serious. That item then automatically becomes flagged for your danger list. It's kind of a dramatic title, but it's helping you realize what are the high priority actions I need to be taking. And so that will be added to a list that we'll talk about a little bit more in your action items. What's nice about the risk assessment is once you've kind of gone through them all, you can export the entire risk assessment, and you can export it as a PDF or a CSV. And then once you're finished and you've started to kind of implement some of this cycle, what you can do is you can actually archive the risk assessment. And what that allows you to do is then complete it again. And I know in your head, you're like, do I really want to answer all these 90 questions again? Well, maybe in a year and a half, 2 years, who knows, a year, 6 months, say you've made a lot of progress. And this is a great way to check in and say, okay, actually now when I answer all these questions, I'm getting all, gold, green check marks, and I'm actually prepared now. And you can actually have a visual demonstration of this was our risk assessment before, this is how we've lowered risk. And that's a really great way, not only for your, like, to give yourself that boost of confidence, but to share that with your administrators, with people who are looking to kind of track the progress of the project. Okay, that was risk assessment. And I'm just going to keep going. If I see a question in the chat, I can try to answer, but we'll mostly leave the questions for the end. So again, don't feel free to throw them in as you think of them. So that brings us to the action items. So as you complete that risk assessment and you're kind of coming up with that danger list, you're going to be like realizing, wow, there are steps that I need to be taking to mitigate these risks. And so the action items module provides a space where you and your organization can actually create and assign preparedness tasks and add deadlines. And both admin and manager level users can add and edit action items. So let's take a look at what that looks like. There's a couple different places that you can add them from, but I think it's best to focus on how to add them directly from the risk assessment question as you go through. So as soon as you answer a question and you're like, oh my goodness, there's actually something that we could do, like maybe we should be checking these disaster kits that we've neglected. You can hit this button, add action item, and this is what the pop-up here is going to look like. And again, these action items are organized into those critical areas as the risk assessment. So you'll see here, you're in the facility section, it will label it as facilities. You can kind of assign a priority to it. You're like, actually, I know hurricane season's coming. I think disaster kits are actually very important to have ready to go because, I think this is a thing we'll face sooner rather than later. So I'm going to label it as priority critical, describe the task that's needed. You can assign a due date on it, and then you can assign it to a specific staff member. Now that could be to yourself, but it could be to, anybody else in your organization who's going to be using dPlan, and you can say, okay, this is how you delegate essentially. I think it's a really great way in general to streamline the process. And then you can always go back to these action items, edit them, and you can add on to them. You don't just have to be adding them while you're doing the risk assessment. So those are your action items. And I would say these are the kind of fundamental things that are really going to give you the momentum to keep on with your emergency planning. So then if you actually go into the action item module, so before, right, we were under risk assessment, we're now under action items. And this is where you're going to see, like, especially as an administrator, all of the action items together. So it's going to be, for a contributor, it would just be their personal list of assigned items. Again, because you're the administrator, you're seeing everybody's items. And they can be viewed, sorted, and you can also export the list if you need to. You can, again, export it as a CSV. And then for each item, as an administrator, right, you can delete them, you can add more context, but you can also, everyone's going to be able to mark them as complete. I also really like this feature down here on the progress log, because a lot of these are tasks that are going to include multiple steps or take some time. And so you can keep everybody up to date on what's going on with a progress message, right? So the progress message here is the inventory on what we actually have so far for our disaster kits, was started on this date. And again, this is just helping you keep track of the actions that are being taken for your planning. And actually for each user, when they log on, on the kind of main dashboard, you'll see the kind of progress on the risk assessment, but then you'll also see the action items assigned to you. Okay, and that brings us on to the next category, which is critical stuff. This is a category that admin and managers users can access. And it's really useful more for the kind of response recovery parts of the cycle. Each organization is able to upload files, documents, images, spreadsheets, links, notes, all sorts of information that it needs for kind of its response and recovery. And it's a really handy feature of having a spot to kind of co-locate all of that information. So in addition to uploading files, organizations can enter information manually, and it will kind of sort it like a database. Here on the screen is an example of like a file upload. So say you had sort of a draft or some basic disaster planning information already in a document. This is like an attachment of that file, and you can click and open that file. And then there's also example here of a website link. So maybe you think it's really handy to make sure everybody has access to professional development resources. And so you've linked here to the NEDCC training calendar. But this is, I mean, these are just two really basic examples. As you can see here, there's all types of sort of categories of stuff that you can be uploading. I want to say the tool lives on a dedicated AWS server. And AWS provides a service level agreement with 99.99% of uptime. So you should be able to access this kind of almost guaranteed in the event of an emergency. The website is also compliant with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's protected by HTTPS. So really, again, this tool is optimized so that it can be used for mobile access on your phone. You should be able to, depending on the apps on your phone, be able to open your PDF and documents and also be assured that you could be uploading sensitive material here, but that material is going to remain safe and secure. Again, I think this is a section that can get really overwhelming because you could kind of upload an unlimited amount of critical stuff and you think, oh, there's so much information I should be storing here. I would say just start with the most basic essential information, key staff member under people, key documents like your collections policy, your insurance documents, and then know that this is always something that you can build and improve on over time. Our fourth module is reports. There's 10 different reports that can be run, and all of them can be exported as PDFs. So on the left side of the screen, you are seeing the 10 reports that are available. The example we're looking at here is medical emergency procedures. It's just including your basic response information as well as the first responder information that's specific to your organization. And so the way that it kind of comes up with this information is under critical stuff, you would, add a person and you would say, okay, this is the fire commander, this is the police chief. And you would mark them as a first responder so that this report would know to add that information there. Several of the reports on the left are kind of just singular elements of a larger disaster plan. And what's nice is that you can print and export them so that you have nice paper-based backups of like your most critical pieces of information. But it also allows you to sort of mix and match elements into a customized format that works for your organization. I think there's definitely a lot of cases where there's different levels of staff at organizations and not everyone needs the same emergency plan information. So you might have a complete plan that you give to your department heads, but a sort of a more simplified plan that would be useful for like a volunteer at your organization. So although if you wanted all 10, it's sort of annoying to have to go and individually export each report and then merge them together. It's done this way to kind of give you that flexibility, essentially. And then we have already arrived at our fifth and final module, and this is guides and resources. So dPlan has actually already a built-in curated library of resources, links, and tools for emergency preparedness and response. And they are designed to help you with all 9 areas of preparedness. So again, we're up here in this final tab up here. They're arranged over here by critical area. You can navigate between the areas using this panel on the screen. So here we're looking at communication resources, and these are just designed to be handy references to support you at each stage in the preparedness process, essentially. So these are stuff that we've put on there. If there's other kind of important resources, that's stuff you can upload under critical stuff. And as I said today, the goal of today was really just to do a general overview to give you a sense of the features of dPlan and how they might be useful to your organization, but we're not getting right into like all the nitty-gritty mechanics of like what it looks like to set up an account. Thankfully, we actually already have tutorials about some of that on our YouTube. So I'm also going to share that link to you all right now in the chat. And there's a lot of great videos, like how do you add a user, how do you create an account, if you're going to import an account, like all sorts of stuff is there. So if you would like an even more like detailed account of how to set up, if you're ready to use dPlan, I recommend starting there. They're very useful videos. And we'll also have a recording of everything we talked about today, which will be nice. So, where does this leave us for our next steps? Well, again, if you are a Massachusetts library, the clock is ticking for you to get registered for your free year. So please, I encourage everyone to get on that as soon as possible. After your free year is up, you will receive an email. It will be asking you if you would like to pay to renew for another year. If you don't do that, you will eventually lose access to the account. So my recommendation is that if you decide that you don't want to continue to use dPlan, make sure you export any important information that you were storing there if you don't have copies elsewhere. But again, this is really just to help you get started and take things step by step. So, here on the screen, you're seeing some suggested next steps. You want to start by figuring out who are your allies and stakeholders in this work. Hopefully, this is not something that you have to do completely and totally alone. There are probably lots of other people who have great information, your facilities team, board members, every staff at every level, like everybody probably has something to contribute to this process. So this is not something you have to do alone. And then once you kind of figure out who you might need to call on to do this work, this is the time to make your account and just get started on that risk assessment. I wouldn't worry about any of the other modules, but get working on that risk assessment. And I think you'll get kind of started down the right road. And then the most important thing to remember is if you need help in any of these steps or at any point, reach out to the help@dplan.org and somebody will be happy to help you. So with that, we have lots of time, as I said, to answer any questions. I also have the ability, if anyone wants to see anything in the dPlan more closely, I can share a screen to the website and actually be able to click through stuff. Really anything that I didn't cover today that you're curious about, please feel free to chime in the chat. Lori asks, does dPlan suggest action items to add based on our risk assessment responses? It does not. So I think in a lot of times if you looked through the risk assessment questions, the state or like their statements, essentially, the statement themselves sort of imply what your action should be. So it's either if you're not doing that, the idea is that you should be. And so it's then up to you to think, okay, well, what are the steps I maybe need to take to get there? And if you do come across one, you're like, okay, I actually do need a disaster kit. I don't know where to start. Some of the information might be in guides and resources, or you can reach out to us and we can help point you in the right direction of some suggested steps to take. Zoe asks, what can you access with the free plan? I think that you can do and Amy can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you can do like like the pocket response plan, which is a document that you can then just like a one-page document you can print. But I don't think it lets you. Oh, but also, do you mean free plan from Massachusetts libraries? Now I'm questioning myself. Do you mean free like as in like Massachusetts paid for the year, or do you just mean free in general? No, just the general. Okay, yes. Then my original statement stands. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying, Zoe. Does this have a mobile app? So no, it does not have an app, but it has been, as I said, designed so that if you opened the website on your phone browser, that you would be able to access everything and easily, it's like enhanced for your mobile device on the browser. Good question. Yeah, the idea is that you probably are not sitting down at your computer in the event of an emergency. So it is important to be able to access it on your phone. Does dPlan have resources that are specific to different kinds of institutions? I'm at a community college library. Do you mean like in the resources and guides section specifically? Yes, okay. I have not looked around to see how too much about how it's broken up. Um, and I don't think it would get as specific as community college library. But it is definitely a tool that was designed to support libraries, museums, as well as like theater and performing arts organizations. And so it's my understanding that the resources and guides sort of have enough information to support all of those institutions. A lot of it, honestly, should be pretty um universal, but there are probably things that are specific to like theaters that are not specific to libraries, and there is a breakdown based on that in the resources. So there's some things specific to both. Um, but if you're not seeing something there, um, that you're like, oh, I need, if you're not, if there's something you're missing that you need, you're again, always feel free to reach out to us, even just like the info at NEDCC, and we're happy to point you in the right direction, in terms of especially like community college library, specific things. Is there a place to store photos you might take in an emergency? Do you mean like, oh, like photos you're taking in the event of an emergency, like storing them? Interesting. I've that is a great question. I've never considered that. Um, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to upload them to critical stuff. If that was helpful. I don't know, like after an emergency, like what point in your recovery response like if you're just really worried about like losing them and having a place to back them up, yeah, I don't see why you couldn't upload them to critical stuff, but I think there's probably other solutions to backing up photos that are probably more useful than this, than that in that instance. Can you go back to the last slide that lists all the modules and what they do and what they focus on? Let's see. Like this one? Yeah, okay. And again, we can share out the recording of this. And also if anyone specifically wanted the slides, I'm happy to share those as well. Okay, yeah, we can definitely share out the slides. Okay, well, if there are not any more questions, again, I'll thank you all for taking the time to attend today. And please don't hesitate to reach out if there are questions that you think of in like an hour, which I know always happens to me. I end a webinar and I think, oh, I should have asked that. You know where to find us, and we're happy to help.